Welcome. I'm Kevin Miller. This is a podcast for your personal evolution. In this episode, in this age of distrust, it seems we do not trust ourselves. This is where to start. I feel we are in an age of trust, a desire for trust, and a lot of distrust. Right now, you're listening to this podcast, and outside of podcasts that are just news or entertainment, I see people tuning in to listen to hosts that they look to for trust. You wouldn't be listening here now if you did not have some level of trust in me. I see this as good and bad. As of this recording, I'm about to head to a podcast convention where they are inducting my dad, Dan Miller, of 48 Days to the Work and Life You Love fame, into the Podcast Hall of Fame. 10 inductees, he's one of them. He passed away a couple years, and he's being inducted by Dave Ramsey, his long time at least, friend and family friend. And my family and I are receiving the award, and I'm giving the acceptance speech. I'm incredibly honored by that. But to Dave Ramsey, that was my point. Guy's a celebrity who got famous for his guidance on money. Today, however, he has a massive following and massive trust from that audience who he can give guidance to about anything and everything, and they will listen. And I see a culture who tends to err on, I'd say, over trust. We find somebody like that to trust, and then we want to trust them for everything because we don't know who else to trust. And I feel it brings up the question of how much do we trust ourselves? Not to be islands unto ourselves and not look for guidance. Of course, we would do that. Seek wisdom and counsel. But how much do we trust ourselves? So in this episode, I have with me Dr. Shadé Zahrai. So Shadé is a behavioral researcher, peak performance educator, and leadership strategist for major global companies with a PhD in organizational behavior. She's known for helping organizations and individuals build confidence and overcome self-doubt through practical strategies drawn from psychology and neuroscience. So Shadé has a new book that compiles her findings called Big Trust, Rewire Self-Doubt, Find Your Confidence, and Fuel Success. She walks us through a proven framework of acceptance, agency, autonomy, and adaptability, and helps us reveal and reframe limiting beliefs, quiet these imposter thoughts we seem to all have, and reclaim a lot of inner strength. So whether you're second guessing a big decision, overthinking in high stakes moments, or feeling stuck despite really knowing what you're capable of, Shadé's developed these practical steps that lead, I find, to just some powerful results. You can find Shadé at bigtrustbook.com. And on there, you can actually do this 12-question self-diagnostics on your level of trust and self-doubt. And you're going to hear a lot coming up here as she talks us through self-doubt and what seems to be a growing aspect of this in our culture. All right, so coming up next, Shadé Zahrai and I, we talk about trust and overcoming our self-doubt. Let's evolve ourselves. Shadé, when your book in this topic came across, I was immediately interested. And the way that you came at it, as we were talking about off mic here, I find unique. I find insightful, and I find somewhat sobering as well. So I'm eager to dive in, and just thank you for taking the time, especially before your big trip, to be with us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Kevin. I'm so excited about the conversation that we're going to have.
I am too, because I'm curious. And I'll tell you right off the bat here, as you look at the title of your book, Big Trust, Rewire Self-Doubt, Find Your Confidence, and Fuel Success, I found myself thinking about, as we talk about this topic, I kind of wanted to lay out for myself and for the audience what our goal is. If our goal as a person right here, right now, wherever somebody's listening, is achievement, you just want to, achieve the goal at no cost or whatnot. In my experience, you can do a lot with self-doubt. You might even use it for fuel. But go back to what I said, if you want to achieve it at no cost. My experience, and this is where my first inquiry is, Shadé, is I feel like I achieved some things that I'm grateful for within my self-doubt. but there were consequences that finally came to a head. And that's where I really initially zoned in with your message.
Can I ask you, Kevin? So consequences. So this is so relevant for so many people, this idea of achievement, because everyone wants to achieve something in life, even if it's just a calm, peaceful, drama-free life. We have goals that we wish to achieve, but as you said, that self-doubt can sometimes drive us to achieve those things. But there are consequences and sacrifices that we might make when we're driven by doubt over something like trust. So, Kevin, can you share with us what were some, if you're open to, what were some of those consequences? Because we can use this as a bit of a case study to then guide the rest of the conversation.
I was very ignorant of myself, of my emotions, of some of my internal well-being, and the kind of earning my way out of trying to earn my way out of self-doubt and work my way out of and achieve my way out of, ultimately led to the easy statement, and I'm going to dig in more, but is burnout. I just finally hit the day where I realized I was bitter, not at anybody, just within me. I was bitter. And for the first time, I realized my expectation of no limits, no excuses, that apparently I had some limits. And I'll never forget the day. I know where I was. I know when it was. And that's where it started. It didn't heal it right away, but that's where the awareness started, that the achievements on top of, I guess it's the self-doubt. Again, I'm thinking about that now in terms of you and your book and this message, that there were consequences, negative.
Okay. Thank you so much for sharing it, because again, hugely relatable. So what would be valuable to start with is some of the misconceptions people have around self-doubt. And we can almost go through a little bit of an initial myth busting. And these are insights that I learned from the last 5 years. So I've done a 5-year deep dive through my PhD research. We had 4,000 participants globally. We ran a series of studies. I've also looked at the last 30, 40, and 50 years of literature and research to find out what have other esteemed minds in the field had to say about why we doubt ourselves. And so the most common misconceptions that I keep hearing, the first one is that self-doubt disappears with achievement or with experience. We tell ourselves, when I get there, when I achieve that thing, then I will finally feel like I'm enough. I'll feel like I've made it. I'll feel like I've reached that state of happiness and success and fulfillment that I seek. And the voices will quiet down, the overthinking will stop. I'll feel like I'm there. But that's not how it works at all. What we know is that self-doubt just scales with responsibility. It just scales with every new level that you reach. So early on, what we find is that our doubts typically revolve around fitting in and belonging. I want to be part of the group, the peer group. I want to be in the in crowd. I want to be a core part of my team at work or the sports group or whatever it is. We want to belong. And so what we might do is change how we show up and how we speak and the behaviors that we have every day to fit the people around us. Because if they approve of us, then we approve of ourselves. Because belonging is our modus operandi early on. Something that we see a lot happening in the early stages of self-doubt. People will often use big, complex words to try and come across as more credible or more intelligent. And I did this when I started my corporate career. I did not feel like I belonged. I'm a lawyer by training, 4 years in the legal industry, and then I did 7 years in banking and finance. And I was using these complex words to try and feel like I fit. What I didn't realize is that using overly complex language, what we know from research, is it actually undermines your credibility and undermines your perceived intelligence. So not the right way to do it, but that's often what happens early on. As we evolve, as we develop, we keep setting our sights on the next goal. When I achieve that, then I will be happy. Then I will be enough. But it never happens. We sacrifice things on the way. Like Kevin, you said, it led you to burnout. There would have been so many consequences. And you get to that end point and you think, why doesn't this feel like how I thought it was going to feel? And then you just set your sights on the next goal.
Okay, I want to pull on that, Shadé, because I feel what you're saying right there is dramatically I want to, how can we make it more profound? But it's an easy nod. It's an easy head nod. Oh yeah. And then we go on, and I want to stop and go, yeah, but I am concerned that we, including me historically, at least, I hope not now. I'm working on it. The bottom line is that's why I wanted to question it. Do we really want, as you said, do we want to achieve fulfillment, contentment, or joy? Or would we rather have the big win that can go on our bio and say, oh, they made $1 billion. They are, famous, rich, powerful, whatever that thing is. And I remind myself of Arthur Brooks in his Strength to Strength book. And here on the show, he shared some study they did. I don't remember the details, but it was with Olympians, or survey they did with Olympians, and said, if you could guarantee the gold medal, would you be willing to do that? But you only get to live for like 5 years more, something like that. Okay. If you remember the study, give it better details than what I did. And a percentage of a decent percentage said, maybe a majority said, yeah, they do that. I'm going, oh, dang, so take that and to us, what do we want? Are we okay with burning both ends and burning out young if we can just get the thing? I feel like it's a sobering question for us all to really get honest with.
It is. And if I'm totally honest, so just to go back to that study, I came across it and I was mind blown, because you think the reason why we want to achieve is because of how it feels and how other people see us. But if you're dead, what's the point? I saw this thing yesterday, Kevin, and it was just on social media. It said something like, in 100 years, all 7 billion people currently alive will be dead. So just do the thing. Stop overthinking. Just start. And I loved it because, again, it was this very sobering realization that we put so much pressure on ourselves to perform, to achieve, to seek the approval of others. But to what end? We're holding ourselves back. We're preventing ourselves from reaching our potential and achieving what we want to achieve in terms of that personal fulfillment. But why? Life is short, and in 100 years, we're all going to be dead anyway. A lot of people don't like that reality, but it's true. But Kevin, going back to your question, okay, would you prefer to achieve the thing or be happy and fulfilled? I say you don't have to choose between the two. You can do both.
Fair.
And that is the goal. I think we live in this world of dichotomies where a lot of people will talk about, no, you've got to prioritize the fulfillment. You've got to prioritize that because that's what matters. And I agree, that is important. But you can absolutely do both. And that was actually the impetus for me writing this book. It was helping people realize that you don't have to sacrifice one for the other. You can do them at the same time, where you're making sure that you're not doubting yourself, you have more flow, you are not beating yourself up at every stage, but you're still achieving. You're still being able to go out there and achieve your potential and do the cool things, but making sure that you're not leading towards burnout. And I'm sure that as we discuss, as we continue the discussion, we can explore how to actually do that. But that's essentially that very first realization or truth that I came across was self-doubt doesn't disappear. It just keeps scaling with you, which is why you need to understand, okay, why is it happening? And then how do I actually start to work with it rather than trying to resist it? So that's our first myth. And then I'll move into the others, but I know you were going to say something.
I want to pull out that as I read your book, what came to mind is the concern that we have normalized self-doubt, just like we normalize. If we take chronic illness and disease and the general pathologies most people have, the headaches, the aches, the pains, the whatever, we've kind of normalized that. People expect that, oh yeah, that's just part of life. And you always have the bottles of this, that, and whatever to take care of things. And of course, what's the normal number of pathologies like that? Well, 0 would you hope. So here I feel like we've normalized self-doubt, and I am happy to use this conversation to say, no, it's not just the normal. It shouldn't be. I saw a video of you talking about, we're not born with self-doubt. Yeah. Even that is probably controversial to some people.
Mm-hmm. No, very true. I'm getting some reflection on the.
Oh, I saw that.
For anyone who's watching or listening, I'm next to a glass table. And so when I move my hand, like it's reflecting the light. And when I move my hand, here, Sorry, everybody. I don't know where that's coming from. Where is it coming from? Anyway, hopefully it's not distracting.
No, not to me.
Yes. Oh, good. I'm glad. So yeah, we have completely normalized it in the sense that we think that this struggle is just a part of how it needs to be. But when we accept that, that's not helping us change that. And so we're just resigning ourselves to a life of unnecessary suffering when it doesn't have to be that way. So let's move on to some of these other myths, because I think they're so fascinating and so relevant. And I'm sure many people listening will relate to these. So that was the first one. Self-doubt doesn't actually disappear. It just scales. And that's why it's paramount for us to make sure that we're addressing the root of our self-doubt. The second myth is that we think that we are the only one who experiences self-doubt. But that has a term. It's called pluralistic ignorance. We're not the only ones that experience self-doubt. In fact, the majority of people experience self-doubt. Some studies have found that 82% of people feel like imposters at some point in their lives. Our own research has found that almost 80% of people struggle intensely with one of the 4 drivers of self-doubt, which I'll share after I get through the misconceptions. And so that's 8 out of 10 people. In my view, I think the number is far higher than that, but it requires, in order for us to measure whether someone experiences self-doubt, we're requiring them to have a degree of self-awareness and to be honest and actually admit it. And a lot of people are not willing to admit it. So that's our second myth, that we're the only ones who feel this way. No, we're not. The third myth, which I touched on, is that we think that self-doubt is just one thing. It's just this big blob of worry and anxiety and fear and insecurity and hesitation. And so we think then that the solution is just one thing. If we say the affirmation every morning, I am enough. If we start reminding ourselves, no, I'm not a fraud, I deserve to be here, then that'll solve our self-doubts. That's not how it works, because self-doubt doesn't have one root cause. According to decades worth of research and our own, there are 4. And again, I will share what these 4 are very soon. Now, the fourth misconception with self-doubt comes to this. So, Kevin, I want to ask you this question. Although you might have enough of an awareness, so you might not be a good example, but let's see. If I were to find you on the street and I said, Kevin, what is the opposite of self-doubt? And you didn't have a lot of time to think about it, what would you say? There was one thing.
Peace.
Beautiful. Yeah, see, you have too much awareness. So we get 90% of people who will say the opposite of self-doubt is confidence. And then we get the other 10% of people saying something like clarity or peace or meaning or why. What's fascinating, though, when we actually look at the research, a lot of people think confidence is the solution. If I feel more confident, then I won't feel the self-doubt. And how they define confidence is this feeling of certainty or full self-belief. But that feeling, again, when we're looking at all of this literature, that feeling actually doesn't come before you take action. It doesn't come before you do the thing. What happens is you need to do the thing, take the step, complete the task, so that your brain gets an evidence point or a proof point that, hey, I can do this, I did it, which then increases a sense of skill and competence, which then boosts what is called your self-efficacy, which is the internal belief of I can do this. And that is what creates a sense of confidence, which then primes you to want to keep going. So that feeling that we're waiting for actually comes after you take the action, which means all of these people are waiting to feel that before they get started. They say, I'll know when the timing is right. I'm waiting to feel ready. And they're sabotaging themselves and keeping them stuck. So if confidence comes after and it's the result of action, what comes before it? And the answer to this is self-trust. You need to fundamentally trust yourself enough that you trust that you are worthy of it, that you can do the thing, or you can learn how to do the thing, that you have some degree of control over the outcome. Because when we don't believe that we're personally powerful, we focus on things outside of our control, which makes us feel powerless because we are powerless, and then we don't take action. So self-trust is really the antidote to self-doubt. And the beautiful thing is that you don't have to eliminate the self-doubt. You just have to trust yourself more. You just have to have a higher degree of self-trust than the self-doubts that you have. And it allows you to move forward.
Let me ask on confidence, because since you mentioned that, Shadé, because not having self-doubt, again, I bother myself with what I feel like is our propensity to polarize. It's this or that. And you said that it's one or the other. And that with not having self-doubt, we put ourselves over here and we're uber confident in that. Maybe some confidence, but what I want to stick in there, what I perceive of you, I vetted you, and what I'm looking for is also a level of humility. Can I be confident and humble? I don't perceive that we as humans, and maybe even in this demographic of, self-help or whatnot, we struggle to hold those together. Mm-hmm. And self-doubt feels more comfortable and kind and humble. And we struggle to how to be humble over here on the confident side. And we have a lot of examples that I struggle with, people who are so confident. I don't perceive much humility. And when those get the limelight, I think that makes that muddies the waters even more so. So speak to that, the ability to not have self-doubt, but also to be, again, I don't know a better term than humble, but you tell me.
Beautiful. So humility is essentially defined. I had an incorrect understanding of humility for many years. I thought humility meant lowliness and constantly putting other people forward in the sense that, no, you're better than me. You know more than me. You're more worthy than I am. But when we look at what the definition of humility is according to the research and the literature, it's essentially awareness of your strengths and what you do well, but also a very clear awareness of your gaps and your weaknesses and being okay with acknowledging that, which I think is fantastic. I truly believe that the world would be a better place if people had more intellectual humility and competence-based humility, where people acknowledge, yes, I don't have all the answers. I'm learning as I go, and that's okay. So when someone has confidence in areas, there's an entire body of research that looks at how people with less competence and less experience in something tend to overestimate their competence in that space. So the less someone knows, the more competent they feel. Now, you might know someone, Kevin, and I certainly do, who they really don't know a lot about what they're talking about, but they feel like they do. They feel like they're the experts. And what researchers David Dunning and Justin Kruger found is the reason why that happens is because they don't know what they don't know. And so when you're starting something new and you're just dabbling, you might think, oh, yeah, I know a lot about this. And then you go off and you share it and you sound like you're the expert when really that's just a form of ignorance. You're not aware of what there is to know. That said, sometimes there are people who do know a lot and they know they don't know a lot, but they still have confidence. I call it delusional confidence. It's not based on reality. And that is a worry because they can be very convincing to those who are easily swayed. And that's when you get misinformation. You get people following them like it's gospel because they speak with so much conviction. And again, very, very dangerous. We see it a lot online in the health and wellness space. We see it a lot in the psychology space. And again, it can be really concerning. So having that humility is so important.
Shadé, I am struggling to remember his name, and I apologize to him if he hears this. He's a professor at A&M, and he's a First Amendment rights expert. He gets called around the country to deal with First Amendment issues. And he said on the show, he says, chances are, for anybody listening and most everybody anywhere, I'm one of the top experts. There's few people that know more about my topic. And he says, the more I learn about it, I think I know about 15% at best.
Yeah.
I love this. Again, I like the word sober, the sobriety of that, not being intoxicated with what I think I know. And I think Einstein's attributed with, I think some other people are too, but with him saying, the more I learn, I realize the less I know. And so thank you. Align with
Beautiful.
What you shared.
I love it. And just on Einstein, fascinatingly, he considered himself an involuntary swindler. So he's quoted with saying, I feel like the esteem that in which my life's work is held is so far beyond how it should be held. So basically what he's suggesting is that he doesn't feel like he deserved all the attention he deserved. And that's a sign of feeling like an imposter. That's a sign of self-doubt. And one could say that's a sense of humility. So then how do we know, okay, how do we make sure that that desire not to be delusional in our confidence, how do we make sure that doesn't actually translate into self-doubt where we're holding ourselves back?
Mm-hmm.
And so this is where I like to define self-doubt. So if you look at self-doubt, there's two components. There's self and there's doubt. Doubt is about uncertainty, right? I doubt whether the sun is going to be shining this afternoon. I doubt whether the taxi is going to get here on time. Self-doubt is suddenly where we turn that uncertainty inwards and we start doubting ourselves, our worthiness, our competence, our abilities. So you can have doubt that you don't know everything there is to know. And that's very healthy. I know. I've just spent the last 5 years doing a deep dive in this space. I probably know this space better than anyone in the world because my thesis is on it and I've studied specifically this area. But that's not to say that if I were to move 2 degrees to the left or 6 degrees to the right in a slightly different area, I wouldn't know anything because that's not my area of expertise. And that's where we need to make sure that that questioning that we have doesn't come back to ourselves. I can say, and look, I'm going to acknowledge right here, I've studied self-doubt. We have coached leaders and C-suite in Fortune 100s. We have 7 million students on LinkedIn Learning. We have had remarkable success in terms of our business and our ability to help people. But I still have a lot of self-doubt, a lot of it. And I can honestly say that the principles and the insights from this book that I wrote have helped me immensely acknowledge that I can still feel the doubt, but shift it away from myself so it's not me attacking and criticizing me, and I'm making it more just doubt about the situation, and I can still move forward in spite of it. So fundamentally, in my view, how we make sure that humility doesn't translate into self-doubt is we need to make sure that it doesn't prevent us from moving forward, and we make it about doubt about the situation as opposed to doubt about ourselves.
Mention the word within humility that you misperceived it early on and that initially you thought about it. I don't think you used this word, but you said something to the effect of minimizing yourself.
Yes,
what was
like
it?
loneliness.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. With this, I feel like how you just shared it now was, again, I'm going to keep using the word sobriety. It's what I'm stuck on right now. And being sober I do know some stuff. I don't know a lot, but I do know some stuff. I can have confidence in that and humility in what I don't know. Okay, I want to pull out, you just said in regards to self-doubt, you said 3 things. You said worthiness, competence, and abilities. Okay, competence and abilities. I am confident I can increase those. I can study, I can learn, I can train, I can whatever. But that first one, I want you to hone in on that one, worthiness. Now, I come from a religious background, a Christian religious background. And most of my experience in that construct, when you talk about worthiness, it was, oh, my worth is, with God. I am not a fan of that answer these days, or I question it because I still find people who will say, oh, my worthiness is God. And I see them living with great self-doubt. And so I'm thinking, I think we've missed something here. That internal worthiness, I still feel is an issue that comes up when we talk about identity, when we talk about security, somebody who really feels again, I'll use that word, at peace with themselves, that feels fulfillment, that feels contentment, whatever the word is, that thing that I long to. If I'm going to achieve anything these days, that's what I want most. And it's really what I am drawn to most in other people, looking for that core. We talked about energy in each other before this. I'm looking for that. But that worthiness, I don't feel there's a clear understanding of what that core worthiness can be, should be, can look like. Oh, tell me.
This is leading us beautifully into the 4 drivers of self-doubt, which is really the crux of Big Trust. Why don't I quickly define what Big Trust is? Because people are like, why did you call your book Big Trust? When you can fundamentally trust yourself, you can take action, you can do the thing, you can back yourself, you can bounce back from failure, you can navigate uncertainty because you trust that you will be able to handle it. right? So fundamentally, trust, we know trust is important. Big trust refers to trusting yourself across 4 dimensions, because when you don't, across any of these dimensions, that's where self-doubt gets in. That's where it infiltrates. And what we've uncovered is that these 4 things are the drivers of our self-doubt. So you touched on this idea of worthiness. There's so much I'm going to share. I'm going to quickly just give everyone a top line as to what these 4 drivers are. Then I'm going to go into why it's important to understand, because you mentioned identity. So let's actually explore a little bit about identity and how that keeps showing up. And then we'll look at the drivers in more detail, and worthiness is one of them. So for everyone listening, what we've uncovered, and this comes from research that was done in the late 80s, 70s, and 80s, researchers had uncovered this construct, this personality construct of 4 things. When these 4 things converge, it shapes how we see ourselves. It's called your core self-evaluation. And it essentially creates your self-image, your self-concept, your sense of identity. It determines what you think is possible for you. It determines what opportunities you think you're worthy of. It determines whether you take that step forward or get stuck in hesitation and overthinking. Those 4 things are fascinating and incredibly powerful, because what decades of research has found, when they've done meta-analyses of over 100 studies, these 4 things predict people's job success, their performance, their career satisfaction, how happy they are in their relationships and in life, and how much money they end up making, regardless of where they stand or where they start out in life. So they are incredibly, incredibly powerful. But then what we found is that let me tell you what they are, the personality components. The first one is self-esteem. How do you view yourself in terms of your worth and your value? The second one is self-efficacy, which is, do you believe that you can do the thing, that you have what it takes to achieve the goal? The third one is what's called locus of control. What does that refer to? Where do you place control in your life? Do you feel that you have some degree of control to shape an outcome? Or do you feel like life just happens to you? You're a victim. Other people hold the shots. And then the fourth one is emotional stability, which is related to neuroticism and how well we're able to manage our emotions. So I came across this during my PhD research, and it blew my mind. And then the more conversations I was having about it, I noticed that people were resisting it. Why? Because these are personality constructs. They are linked to our personality. And as soon as you say that to someone, do you know what the excuse is? Oh, well, if it's my personality, that's just who I am. I guess that's the kind of person I am. We get locked into this view that our personality is just who we are and we cannot change it. And it's because for decades, that's what the research showed. Personality is stable across our lifespan. It evolves and develops in the first sort of 3, 4 to 7 years of our lives based on our experience with our parents. Did we get love and nurturing? Did we get their attention? Or did we feel like we needed to perform and be the good kid in order to be valued? Did we get celebrated for trying new things, or did we get berated when something didn't go right? That creates our sense of personality. And then, yes, that is very stable across your lifespan. But what more recent research has found, and what my own studies have found, because we conducted a 6-week intervention to see whether we could fundamentally change an aspect of someone's personality. And what our research has confirmed, and that research has confirmed, is yes, you can. So personality is stable, relatively, if you don't do anything with it. And if you keep saying, this is who I am, then guess what? That is who you will always be, because you don't believe it can change. But you can change aspects of your personality by choosing to intervene. What does that mean? That means targeting a specific aspect of who you are, using evidence-based principles and tools to slowly change the way you relate to yourself. And then over time, you're essentially rewiring your brain, because what is a belief? And what is personality? To some degree, some personality traits are hereditary or based on nature. So just your biological makeup, your DNA, etc. But then a lot of that either switches on or is never expressed based on your environment. And then what happens is that pathway in your brain becomes so deeply entrenched, so habitual, that it becomes a deeply held belief that you hold. But in the same way that those beliefs were initially created, you can overwrite old beliefs and start to create new ones, which in my view is incredibly liberating and empowering.
Incredible. Okay, got a question.
Go
First
for
off,
it.
tell me what the number, I got self-efficacy, locus of control, emotional stability. What was number one?
Self-esteem.
Self-esteem.
Yep. And
Okay.
these four things create what's called the core self-evaluations.
Let me ask then, because personality is a important topic.
Yes.
To me, I grew up with a father in this realm of personal development. I took God knows how many personality profiles, you name it. I took it. We talked about them. Very interesting to me, and still is today. I still give credit to some aspects of it. But when you talk about changing your personality, okay, if I own it for myself, that I have certain predispositions, I have certain propensities that feel kind of natural. I'm kind of okay with them. I tend to be more introverted. I recharge with solitude, and I'm kind of good with that. I can extrovert and I can do the charismatic thing, when it's necessary, and I can inspire myself with that. But there are aspects I'm drawn to the outdoors, to athleticism. I'm a foodie, all those little labels we give ourselves. And I'm naming the ones that I like. I mean, I enjoy being how I tend to be being. But what I pulled out from what you said is you said, I can change in my personality. Do I want to change those things? Not necessarily, but how I relate to me, that has changed. And from that, how I relate or at least connect to others. And I really like your four areas there, because I can be me, quote. I can be me. I'm not going to become super extroverted. I may not become super sedentary. I may not become whatever, but I can be me with high self-esteem as opposed to low self-esteem, with high self-efficacy as opposed to low, with high locus of control. One of my favorite, I love the term, with high or as opposed to low emotional stability. And I relate to myself, and then everything different. Now I'm back to today experiencing more peace, contentment, and fulfillment than ever, while I'm doing literally the doing of life. I'm doing less than I ever have in my entire life. Not that those have to go hand in hand, whatever. That's just me and my own journey. But holy smokes. I mean, so what you said is, that's worth the price of admission for this show to me. I so much gravity. I give so much gravity to what you just helped explain and define. Thank you, by the way.
No, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to be here and share this.
You then, those four areas, now those relate to the four key aspects of your book, which is,
Yes.
I'll read them off: acceptance, agency, autonomy, and adaptability. And again, it's why you're here, Shadé. I mean, these are really my areas of focus right now.
Beautiful.
Coming back to identity and secure. What creates a secure identity? Because I feel my experience of our culture right now is we are it feels like one of the highest times of insecurity ever.
Yes.
The most fragile identities ever. And these areas, and I'll admit, especially agency, autonomy, adaptability, and acceptance. Yeah. I mean, you're talking about identity and locus of control. And I don't know that there's not a more important focal point for me as I look at myself, my own journey, my children, and the culture at large. So however you want to unpack these,
Okay.
we could be here for the next 3 hours. So
we could, let's do it. No.
Okay, let's
Maybe
go.
there can be a follow-up conversation.
Fair.
So I've just actually been taking notes. So anyone who's listening, I've just been looking down, capturing notes. Anyone watching, you'll know that my attention was here. Here's the story that I think is worthwhile starting with. The first one I want to touch on is, as you said, Kevin, we live in a world that currently amplifies all of our insecurities and our existing vulnerabilities to doubt. I mean, if you start with just the internal space, we're spending so much time online, seeking connection, seeking a sense of belonging to something bigger than ourselves. But social media is designed to pick at our insecurities. Whether it's us questioning our autonomy, do we have control over what's happening in the world and these terrible things people are sharing? It's designed to show us things that we do not have in our lives, to make us feel like we're not enough, so that we don't feel worthy, so that we go out and buy the next thing, the next product, the next gadget, the makeup, whatever it is. So there's that aspect. Then we have all of what's happening in the media, traditional media, which magnifies things that we have no control over, really, as an individual. That's not to say there are things that we cannot, that's not to say that there's nothing we can do about it. But in our immediate world, there's very little. This is why collective is so important, collectively working together to change things. So that's, if you're feeling that, if you're listening to this right now and you feel like you're so insecure and doubting yourself, give yourself some grace. It's a really difficult time to be alive. At the same time, we're also very fortunate that we have more freedoms than many people in the past ever did. Although some people would argue maybe not so much. In any case, we won't get stuck in there. I'm going to cover a bit of a story as to why self-image, self-identity is so important, and how these 4 things that we've just touched on relate to self-identity, and then what we cover in the book. Because if you'll note, I talked about the personality components, but how people resist when we come at it from a personality perspective. Because they say, that's just who I am. There's this inbuilt bias people have, and they use it as an excuse. So let's start with the power of self-image. I'm going to take you back to the 70s and 80s. A psychology professor by the name of Robert Kleck was conducting a fascinating experiment at Dartmouth. What he did is he brought people together, research subjects, and then he sent them out into conversations with strangers, and he wanted them to come back and report on how they felt the conversation went. But there was something interesting that he did. He split them up into a number of groups, and with one of the groups of participants, as he was briefing them, he also drew a scar on their face. On the right side of their face, from the lower part of their ear to the right side of their mouth, he drew a big, ugly scar. And then he let them see themselves in a hand mirror. So they're able to confirm, wow, I have a visual disfigurement on my face, and now I have to go and have a conversation with a stranger. The other group didn't have a scar. So then he sends them all out to have these conversations. They come back in and they report how they felt the conversation went. The group that had the scar reported that they felt that they were judged. It felt tense. Their conversation partner felt cold. So they had essentially felt like they were treated with some kind of prejudice. Because of that scar, the other group didn't notice anything strange, because naturally they're just having normal conversations. That's not particularly unusual, but what Robert Kleck was trying to uncover was something else. If we rewind a little bit, right before those scarred participants were sent out into those conversations, so they haven't had the conversation yet, the researcher said, I'm going to apply some moisturizing cream to set the scar so it doesn't crack. And as they did that, they actually removed the scar entirely. So these people still believed they had a scar. They went into these conversations believing they had a scar and believing they would be treated differently. They had an expectation about that, and that's what they experienced. But the wild thing is, there was no scar. They had created a reality based entirely on what they expected to experience. It's called expectation bias. We don't see the world as it is. We see the world as we expect it to be. And why this is so incredibly powerful for us when we're thinking about how we see ourselves is that we all have certain scars that we're carrying. Of course, they're not physical, but they're internal, based on how we see ourselves. And every single interaction that we're going into, every single meeting, every single presentation, every single opportunity we're deciding to step forward on or not, is going to be impacted by the scars that we have and the expectations we hold around them, around how other people will respond to us, about whether we feel like we're deserving or capable or worthy. And this is how people unknowingly create a reality that is just self-fulfilling. They have a belief and they confirm that belief, even if externally nothing is different, but it's what they're choosing to pay attention to. So with that study, what I find even more fascinating, they had third parties watching all of it back on camera. And the third parties couldn't see any difference between any conversation, whether they were people who had the perceived, they thought they had a scar versus not the scar. There was no difference. So it was entirely in their heads. This is why we need to acknowledge that how we see ourselves is the greatest determinant of what we're able to achieve, because it shapes how we feel, it shapes how we show up, and then it shapes what is going on in our brain. We selectively attend to information that confirms our existing beliefs, and that's also confirmation bias. We will seek out things that verify the beliefs about ourselves. It's called self-verification. William Swan studied this space. We have this subconscious desire for other people to see us the way that we see ourselves, and we're not even aware of it. So if you think you are unworthy, you are not deserving of love or achievement, or you're boring, or you're not good in social situations, or you're awkward, you will unknowingly put yourself in situations where that becomes your reality. And it confirms it. So that part of your mind goes over and goes out, see, told you.
Tell me about that. Before we started recording here, we were talking about energy. And one of the more convicting aspects of this conversation is I believe I do. I embody an energy that I can't hide. And so if there is self-doubt in me, I can't hide it. My kids are going to feel it. You would feel it. Well, self-doubt. I mean, I have some level and you're experiencing some, hopefully less than more, hopefully less than what I've had before. And maybe even just my awareness of it helps mitigate that aspect. But realizing that my security, when we talk, I mean, manifesting is such a big term these days, and thinking that if the majority of my manifesting is coming from who I be, that is not achievement. That is not external focus. That's not my outside capabilities and abilities and my achievement and my goal meaning. That is me. That's the essence of me. And so if that is naked in essence to some degree, especially to those that are maybe more aware, like you, that you would sense that does alter our relationship. That alters what you experience of me. And as people, I see that and they're wondering why they don't connect. And without going into the long story, my own journey within this construct of identity and security, Shadé, I have seen the relationships in my life. I can't say to what degree, but the connection with people, friends, family, whatever, has increased. And I'm just watching and going, I'm actually doing less. I feel like I'm making less effort for the person. I'm just trying to be Kevin secure. Just Kevin, just how it's secure, Kevin. Just often it's just shut up and just be, just breathe deep, take a deep breath and be okay with you, dude. Back to worth, to self-worth and being worthwhile, and to watch the connections. I feel like I'm attracting everybody. I blow my mind with it. And you're talking about it. And there's studies that talk about this and you're citing those, your book. I do love that. I love the research in there. I'm going to be using some of that and talking to you about it as time goes on here. But my gosh, to come back to that, when you have the expectation of the scar on your face, how that permeates everything. To me, it should be one of the most convicting things ever of going, look, if you're having self-doubt and insecure, we all know it to some degree, varying degrees. We all know it. Take care of that. Get Shadé's book is your best medicine to do that. And that's going to I feel like you'll get better results from that than the next goal you achieved and burning the midnight oil, to kicking your own butt, because we see and sense our stuff.
Beautifully said.
Can you feel my passion on that one?
Oh, so much. And just on that, I love it because I have this phrase that I love to come back to. It's that you don't get what you deserve or what you want. You get what you believe.
That's a great line.
Isn't it beautiful? And it's so, on the one side, someone could say, well, that's very woo. But actually, there's decades worth of studies that back this up because of what's going on in our brain. In fact, Kevin, I had this situation once, this idea of like getting back the energy that you exude. And so we talk about big trust as being also an energy state you can exude. Big trust energy is where you go into conversations backing yourself, believing that you'll be fine, trusting yourself. And I had this situation once where I went out, I think I was doing the groceries or something, and I was having a great day. I felt really full of trust in myself. I felt great, so I went to the shopping center and I noticed people were looking at me. People were actually looking at me and smiling, and I was smiling back and having amazing conversations. And then when I got home, Or I think it was even when I got back into the car and, first thing I did is pull down the thing to have a look at myself in the mirror just to make sure everything's still put together. And I noticed earlier that day I'd been cutting some bangs on myself and I'd clipped with my scissors, I'd cut my forehead a little bit. And I still had a piece of tissue stuck over, like it was the blood. So I had this bloody piece of tissue on my forehead. They were not smiling at me, Kevin.
Funny.
They were laughing at the fact that I had a bloody tissue on my forehead. But because I was showing up with big trust energy, I took it as, hey, this is a great day. I'm connecting with people. I'm exuding the energy I want to see. Can you imagine if I had gone out that day and I was feeling insecure and everyone was looking at me and I would have interpreted that as, oh my goodness, I'm inferior. I'm not enough. This is terrible. They're judging me. This is how the energy that you exude comes back to you. So I've been in the US, for everyone listening. I live on a little island on the east coast of Thailand. I've been traveling around the US essentially since the end of September. And I have had remarkably positive experiences with people in the US. People are friendly and open and generous and patient. And I actually asked someone, I think at Houston Airport, they were working there in airport control. And I said, is everyone in the US friendly or is this just my experience? And he said, no, darling, it's because you're friendly. And they give you that back in return. And I thought, oh, of course. All this stuff I talk about is being reflected back to me.
Oh.
And so we create our realities unknowingly. Okay, so now I know that we're coming to time and I want to make sure that everyone listening gets a better understanding of these 4 pieces of how we see ourselves. Okay, so we've talked about these scars and that idea of self-image. These core self-evaluations, these 4 personality components, that creates how you see yourself. Okay, but then we were getting this resistance from people like, this is just who I am, it's my personality. And we realize it's because people don't acknowledge that they can fundamentally change their personality. And if you say to someone, improve your self-esteem, what does that even mean? So that's what my own research has sought to do. It's to look at how do we fundamentally change our personality components through habits, through behaviors, through focusing on certain attributes. So for example, when we're talking about self-esteem, if you want to increase your self-esteem, you need to focus on the habit of self-acceptance. We talk about worthiness and feeling like you're enough. That's really complex and quite out there. But when you understand that, no, it's actually just accepting who you are right now, accepting where you've come from, and accepting that you can still grow and develop. You don't have to be perfect right now. In fact, perfection is not the goal at all. Perfection is unattainable. How do you accept who you are now and then also focus on growth and developing the parts of yourself that need to be developed? When you don't accept yourself, you take feedback personally, you criticize yourself, you outsource your worth, so you require other people to accept you before you can accept yourself. You fear failure, not because of the failure, but because of what it means about you and what people will say about you. If you fail, they'll reject me, they'll judge me, they'll criticize me, I'll be inferior. You set impossibly high standards as a perfectionist and beat yourself up when you don't achieve them. So that's what it looks like when you don't accept yourself. When you do, you say, okay, I am a work in progress and that is okay. I'm not going to take feedback personally. It's not a verdict on my worth. It's helping me grow. I can choose what I do with that feedback. I'm not going to set an impossibly high standard that I'm never going to achieve. I'm going to set something that I know I can achieve and then do even better next time. So you just become more compassionate to yourself. You also stop needing other people to, okay, this is the hardest part for me. You stop needing other people to like you for you to like yourself.
I want to ask about that one because, okay, so this is the first attribute. This is acceptance. Yes. And if you've got time, I've got time. I want to walk through these things.
Okay, great. I was worried we were running out of time, but if you've got time, I've got time.
No, because, well, again, you list this out from the book. First attribute, acceptance. And you say, number 1, we start with self-rejection. I'll never be enough. Then we move to acceptance. Am I enough? And then worthiness, which we talked about, but I wanted to pull out the statement that you wrote. Worthiness, my value doesn't depend on external validation. I'm in this realm that you are, Shadé, in the research and the psychology and whatnot. That term validation, I still feel has a lot of baggage and controversy around it. So I'll just share my own bias. I have wanted to side on not that I'm an island unto myself, not that I don't ever need to check the pulse of how people are experiencing me. I care about that significantly. But if my validation for my self-worth, my core survival, if that depends on someone else or anything external, I'm in trouble.
Yes.
I have given away back to locus of control, my agency. I have given my power to someone else. Not only am I at risk then, but I just put them in a no-win situation. They shouldn't be in control of my self-worth, myself. But I'm going to put it back to you now. We still, I find, even amongst people that I respect, some of the most acclaimed psychologists, I'm not always tracking with the cultural perspective on validation. I feel like there's still a lot of going, no, it is my right to expect validation, and it's your responsibility to validate me to some. There's a lot of that, again, amongst people that I respect, and I'm not resonating. So thoughts?
Okay. I love what you said. You actually highlighted exactly what I was going to say about validation. So I have a view on this as well. I often speak on stages to audiences of up to 10,000. That was an experience in itself. I spoke right after James Clear, author of Atomic Habits, and right before Jocko Willink, former Navy SEAL.
Beautiful.
Talk about like feeling like a fraud, but it's fine. I worked through it. In order for me to get there, I had to continually be validating my ideas, validating my delivery, validating how I speak. What does that mean? That means every time I do something with a client, I will seek feedback. How did it go? Did you like the ideas that were shared? Were they shared in a way that was understandable? Was it actionable enough? That's validating ideas or validating how I'm delivering something so I can make it better, so I can meet the needs of the people that it's serving. When I was doing my MBA, back when I was trying to figure out what my path was, customer validation was massive. You need to validate your service offering, your product with customers to make sure it's what they want. So there's a distinction here between validating what we're delivering to the world to make sure that it's what people want and it's actually helping them versus needing validation for ourselves.
Yeah.
And they're two fundamentally different things. And the moment you can separate the two, you have a superpower because you're no longer taking things personally. You are seeing it as data that can help you improve and get better. Not you fundamentally as a person, like your soul level. No, it's what you're delivering and how you're delivering it. Anyone who is on social media, anyone who is public will probably be aware of their highest performing post because it was validated. There's something in that people liked. And so then you go, okay, well, how do I recreate that to give people more of what they like? So I'm with you. There's absolutely this idea of validation being bad. I don't think it's bad so long as you're not using it to validate who you fundamentally are and your worthiness.
Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just, that's a message I want to continue expounding and thank you. Gosh, yeah, all of these are a big deal to me. I mean, your second attribute here, agency, that is one of the primary terms, personal agency. Now I'm working on trying to give it a further distinction of inner agency.
Yes.
And tell me your thoughts here, because I look at the core internal agency that I want. If you type in personal agency, you kind of come up with, I feel like I've got the ability to pull my bootstraps up and go out there and, take care of the world and be responsible. And it still feels external. I'm looking for the agency like Viktor Frankl had in Man's Search for Meaning, when he had no ability to influence his external world and his circumstance. Zero. He was actually getting beaten and starved. And he realized, but my internal agency, nobody can touch. That's mine. That's the agency I want. And so you go.
Okay. So I love that you mentioned Viktor Frankl. He's mentioned in two different attributes because his story is remarkable.
Yeah.
And his experience actually straddles both the second and the third attributes. So let's look at, I'll define the first attribute and then I'll explain how he ties into both of them. So the first one, so how we define agency in the context of doubt is the way that we build that self-efficacy, which is an internal belief of I can do this thing, which means I trust my skills, my abilities, and my capacity to learn and grow. I trust my resourcefulness and that if I need help, I'll go and ask for it. I trust that I can learn what I need to learn. And even if things don't work out or there's uncertainty, I'll be okay. So what agency gives you is that fundamental trust that you can take the step amidst the uncertainty. And even if things don't work out, you will just find another way. So it's very pragmatic and very much, as you said, about that internal sense of, yeah, I can do this thing. And so when we think about it, okay, here's an example. Someone's about to get onto a stage. Let's use me as an example. I'm about to walk onto the stage of 10,000 people, which funny enough was here in San Diego, and I'm now visiting again. It was at the convention center. And they'd set it up like a giant ring, like a boxing ring. So there were people all around. So there's like an audience all around you, which in itself is really unnerving and off-putting for the first time you do it. Beautiful though, like look at all these people. My sense of agency had to be such that I could trust that I have done this before. Yeah, okay, smaller audiences, but I have done it before. I've got the proof point. I can do it again. I am prepared. I've done what I need to do beforehand to get me to this point. Not only that, something a lot of people forget when it comes to agency, especially when we're talking about manifestation. What I hear so frequently is visualize the kind of person you want to be, and then you'll be able to manifest that in your reality. And yes, there is some degree of truth to that in the sense of when you visualize the person you want to be and fundamentally believe that you can get there, it does two things. The first thing is you are almost upgrading your self-image. You're showing yourself that who I am right now is not all I'm going to be. I can be that. And so you provide that internal upgrade to how you see yourself because you see that you have potential and you can go there. So that's really powerful. The second thing is you start to do what Amy Cuddy suggests, which is you be it until you become it. Meaning you're embodying the energy of that person. You're dressing how that person would dress. You're approaching people how that person would approach them so that you're attracting the kind of energy that's going to reinforce that. But there's an important second element here when it comes to agency. Sometimes what we see, highly successful or high potential people will know where they want to go, what they want to achieve. But one of two things happens. The first thing is that, and we know this from research, it blew my mind when I came across this. That idea of manifesting, visualizing is often called a positive future fantasy. So it's this idea of somewhere we want to go, this great positive aspirational state. When we only focus on that and we keep that front of mind, it can counterintuitively sap our energy to get there, which is wild. We get so caught up in the daydream that we then suddenly feel less desire to work towards that. Crazy, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is that what happens is if we're so clear on where we want to go and we're exuding that energy, when we come across a situation where it's not working for us, there's a roadblock, there's a setback, there's a failure, we mess up, it can shake our sense of being able to get there. And we suddenly think, oh no, why isn't the world giving me what I want it to give me? Why am I not able? And then we start doubting ourselves and then we shrink that future version of who we thought we could be. So there's an important second step, and it's because your agency is being shaken in these situations. So what we encourage people to do, which comes from the literature, be very clear on where you want to go. See yourself as being worthy of that. See yourself as being capable of that. And then here is the second step, which is contrary to a lot of guidance that exists. Anticipate everything that could go wrong. Everything that could get in your way. Now, some people will say, no, you cannot do that because then you're going to attract it. Because energy goes where attention flows, or energy flows where attention goes. This idea of if you have that in your mind, you're going to will it into existence. Because if you're focusing on the negative, you're going to notice the negative. Yes, I agree with that, which is why there's a second piece here. So we encourage people write down everything that could get in your way, every roadblock that could come up, every failure. And then the important and essential next piece is write down your plan of action if that happens. And then visualize yourself overcoming that obstacle. What does that do? That instantly boosts your agency because suddenly you realize no matter what comes in your way, you trust yourself to work through it because you've already mentally rehearsed what you do. It shrinks the fear to size. And then when you start visualizing yourself overcoming all of these obstacles, you are seeing yourself getting closer to that person that you want to be. And you are so much more likely to actually get there. So that is the missing hidden piece that we don't talk about, but it's because we get stuck on the first part, visualize everything that could go wrong. And of course, if you stay there, your brain is wired to magnify the negative, the negativity bias. It's wired to catastrophize, to try and keep you safe, which is why you have to then guide it to the next piece, which is how am I going to overcome that? And it's remarkable how much more empowered you will feel because you are elevating your agency. Now, let me tell you a story that comes from the world of sports that helps us understand the reality of this. So Michael Phelps, one of the world's greatest swimmers, multiple world record holder, his coach said that he had a remarkable ability to visualize not only succeeding, but also everything that could go wrong, all the unexpected things that could happen, like his goggles snapping, or getting a cramp in the middle of a race, or slipping on the starting blocks when he's diving in. And so he said that Michael Phelps used to say that he would do that and then come up with his plan of action and he'd visualize it so that it became ingrained in his nervous system. So that if it happened, he'd been there before. It's called inversion thinking or a pre-mortem in the project management world, where they'll often do this as a team. Now, Michael Phelps, this approach worked so well for him in the 2008 Olympic Games. So he's in the finals of the 200-meter butterfly, which I've never been able to figure out how to do. So he's in the finals, Olympic Games, a lot of pressure. He dives into the water, and within about 25 meters, one of the worst things that can happen happens. His goggles completely fill up with water. He cannot see a thing. Now, most people in that situation would get up, empty the goggles, and look at the people around them and think, oh my goodness, they're so far ahead, and they'd give up. But Michael Phelps had been there before in his mind. He had visualized this happening. He knew exactly what to do. He just defaulted to his mental training. And as he shares in an interview shortly after, he says, I swam blind for 175 meters out of a 200 fly. I won gold and broke a world record.
That's great.
Well, I get goosebumps every time I share that story. He didn't allow the what ifs to hold him back. He actually anticipated the what ifs and then knew what he would do if they would happen, which meant that when it happened in one of the most high, intense pressure situations, where there's, millions of eyes watching around the world, he was able to default to that and it actually propelled him to do even better. So this is the crux of agency. It's acknowledging that, hey, I can do this. And even if it doesn't work out, I still trust that I will be okay.
I
Cool,
love
isn't it?
the story.
So
Thank
cool.
you. That's just incredibly convicting to me to hit those aspects. Yeah, I helped myself in the past a lot by looking at worst case scenario, which sounds pessimistic, but realizing worst case scenario, I'm not going to die. I won't become homeless, and just freeing myself up from that. Well, that leads right into the third attribute of autonomy, which again is one that I feel often gets negative feedback sometimes on how we look at that. Kind of that, again, I'm an island unto myself. I don't need anyone, as opposed to, well, if I go through, you have, number one, resignation. I feel powerless. Nothing I do matters. Going to autonomy, do my choices make a difference? And then to ownership, one of my favorite concepts for us, owning it. I choose my action and I shape my path. And what I like looking at is if I don't accept that responsibility, which when you talk about sometimes getting resistance, I feel like sometimes we don't want that much responsibility. But if I don't choose my actions and shape my path, then who does?
Exactly.
Who does? And again, that doesn't discount, you talk about it. It doesn't discount collaboration. It doesn't discount harnessing the wisdom and the guidance from someone else, but even seeking that is on me. That's up to me to go seek that help, which sometimes I haven't. Sometimes I needed to take my autonomy and go get some help to seek out, but that I choose my action, shape my path. If it's not me, who? And again, I convict myself with saying, if I'm putting that responsibility on somebody else, I think I'm harming them. I'm harming my relationship with them.
Beautifully said. And I love, yes, you've absolutely made this connection to that next attribute. And this brings up the story of Viktor Frankl as well. So for anyone who's unaware, Viktor Frankl was an Austrian neurologist, and I believe he was a psychologist or a psychiatrist. He was also in in the concentration camp during Nazi Germany. And so he was one of the few people who actually survived. And then he dedicated his life to uncovering and unpacking, why did he survive and why did so many other people not? And he attributes it to meaning. He was able to find meaning in the suffering, which is really hard to do. But it's fundamentally because he had a high degree of autonomy, personal autonomy. He chose to have what's called an internal locus of control, where he believed that he had some degree of control over the outcome. Even if the outcome was simply, I'm going to control my thoughts. I'm going to control what I pay attention to. I'm going to control the meaning that I attribute to these things. And it's remarkable when we do that, because suddenly we feel slightly more personally powerful. And we all have a desire to be the causal agents of our lives. We want to feel like we're in control. And the moment that our autonomy falters is when we don't feel like we have control, when we feel like other people are calling the shots. Because in those environments, we feel like we don't have choices. Now, when we feel like we don't have control over a situation, when we feel like we can't do anything to change a situation, there are one of four painfully familiar habits that show up, patterns. The first one is complaining. We can't change the situation, so we complain about it because it makes us feel better, because it gives us a sense of control over something, which is us being able to complain and share how terrible it is with other people. And then guess what happens when we complain? It attracts sympathy. So there's some kind of psychological reward. People say, oh, that's terrible, poor you. Not only that, you'll find that people who complain repeatedly eventually tend to push away the people who could actually help them. Because if you've been around someone who is constantly complaining, you stop trying to help them. And instead, they start attracting people who also complain. Oh, that's terrible. You think that's bad. Look at what happened to me. Oh, that's terrible. And then you create this echo chamber of negativity where you're feeding each other's complaining. Feels rewarding, but you're not changing anything. Also, when we complain, when they've done studies looking at people's brains, they found that complaining actually reactivates the same parts of the brain that were active when you were in the situation. So you're just reliving it in vivid detail. What is that doing? It's creating a really solid pathway in your brain, which is becoming a default, which then creates the, oh, why me? Life is so hard for me. You create the victim narrative, which becomes a belief because you keep revisiting it. So complaining is that first pattern that comes up a lot. We see a lot of resentment. They're extremely resentful towards other people who seem to have easier lives than they do. Easier success, a better family. They're resentful against everyone on social media who seems to have a wonderful life when they're focused on how difficult their life is. So we see resentment. We see a lot of blame. It's not me, it's you. It's because of you. It's because of my parents. My parents never put me into music lessons, and that's why I'm not creative as an adult. It's because of my schooling. It's because of the government. It's because of the world that we live in. Not taking any ownership. And then the fourth pattern is these people also tend to tell the same stories that revisit the same hurts that they've experienced. So if they've been mistreated in the past, they'll keep sharing that story with anyone who will listen. And I've had people in my life who, of course, the first 1, 2, or 3 times they share this story, I have so much empathy for them and compassion, and I try and help them and be there with them. By the time they're telling it for the 10th or 20th time, I've suddenly realized, this person is actively keeping themselves stuck. They don't want to take ownership. Because taking ownership requires more activation in the prefrontal cortex. It requires more brain activity and energy. And their brain is stuck in comfort zone and security zone and safety zone, which means it's actually activated by more of those emotive centers and those belief patterns. Because the function of the brain, so this is really interesting. A lot of the time, and I used to say this, I would say the brain's primary function is to keep us alive, or rather, to keep us protected. It's to protect us. But that's a simplistic view. Really, when we look at the world of neuroscience and what the purpose of the brain is, it's to make sure the rest of our body does what it needs to do using the least amount of metabolic energy. That's the function of the brain. It wants to preserve energy. It's lazy because that is what keeps us alive for longer. So when we come to think about negative thinking and complaining and feelings of I'm not worthy, I can't do this, these are all a result of beliefs that we have. And it's easier for the brain to default with a belief because it doesn't require much metabolic energy. If you want to go in there and start becoming aware of your thoughts and changing your thoughts and changing your beliefs and changing your personality, you have to re-engage the prefrontal regions, the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, which thankfully reduces activity in the emotion centers, but it requires a lot more energy. So the brain is incentivized not to do that. So it requires effort. That's why people become, I hate to say it, but lazy in the sense that they just default to the way they've always been. They say, that's just who I am. They get stuck in the complaining and not taking ownership because they feel safe in that space.
I like your distinction of the brain because I look at that from an insecurity aspect. When I am insecure, my propensity seems to be just to protect,
Totally.
defend, protect, and as opposed to, I like the word preserve, to preserve my, personal ethos is often not protecting myself. It's opening myself. And as I continue training my neural pathways that way, I think my brain is quicker to go to preserving, which may propel me forward, as opposed to protect. And I think I spent a majority of my life with that default protect and limited myself significantly.
We do. We don't realize we are the greatest limiting factor in our lives. Now, that's not to acknowledge that there are people who are living with prejudice and racism and sexism and genuine inequalities, and they need to be addressed. But for the rest of us, we are the greatest limiter in our lives. Now, one of the things you mentioned just now, Kevin, is you lean into the discomfort rather than protecting, which is actually more comfortable for us from a brain perspective. You actually embrace the discomfort that comes with moving forward anyway. And this idea of, and as you were saying, you're rewiring your neural pathways. When we lean into discomfort, what does that mean? That means you feel the effort that you're having to exert, and it feels uncomfortable, and every part of you is saying, just withdraw, retreat, it's much easier. But when you resist that, you're training your brain to say, hey, I can do hard things. This is not as difficult as I thought. Not only that, discomfort has been shown to activate neurotropic factors in the brain, which are proteins that are responsible for learning and creating new neural pathways. And the more you can experience that feeling of discomfort, this is uncomfortable, but I'm doing it anyway, you're building up a tolerance for that discomfort, and then it becomes easier. If you never do hard things, it's going to be really difficult to do hard things. The more you do hard things, you start to feel like, oh, these hard things are not so hard anymore.
I agree. And even the protection aspect, what I'm finding now through my own evolution is the effort to protect feels so tiring now.
Yes.
It just feels exhausting. The clinging, attachments, all those words we can put around that, I continue to feel more tired there and more, at peace without doing that. Though I will say that my peace is increasing. I do sometimes disorient myself, because I'm so used to the protection. So I feel a little disoriented and I'm not protecting, but it's just too tiring. Let it go. And it's not constructive and yada, yada. So this is a playground of my own.
Beautiful.
At this point. Well, and bringing us to the fourth attribute of adaptability. I'm so grateful that you have that as a focal point because, well, let me just read your outline. Overwhelm. This is too much. That's that's where we start. Going into adaptability. Can I manage my emotions? And then to the next, groundedness. I trust my ability to harness my emotions. Shadé, you mentioned certainty in the book. Well, actually, you write about it in the book that our humanity is, we just naturally want certainty. It feels secure, even though we're trying to have certainty in an uncertain world and an uncertain life, a fluid life, not a fixed life. And we're trying to be certain about things that we can't. And I think we experience a lot of cognitive dissonance, a lot of chaos from that. And adaptability. Can I adapt to the changes? Tell me your thoughts on this, because I've been playing with this. We have a lot of focus on, and I don't want to put a negative light on resilience, but I want to question resilience. Obviously, if you get knocked down, to the ability to get back up, to be resilient, great. And I want that because I will be knocked down some. However, as I look at, as you have the fourth attribute, adaptability, looking at if I learn to be adaptable, I probably won't get knocked down as much. I probably won't need as much resilience. I'd rather have adaptability. Again, I want both, but tell me how you feel I'm tracking with your perspective on adaptability.
No, well said. We live in a world, especially when you start moving into the self-help and the business development space, there's a very strong narrative of keep pushing, keep pushing, keep pushing, hustle harder, push harder until you get what you want. You can sleep when you're dead, right? There's this really strong, in my view, look, I think it works for some people, but it doesn't work for the majority of people, and it leads to things like emotional exhaustion and burnout.
Yeah.
And never feeling like you're enough, and feeling like you shouldn't listen to the signs your body's giving you. I have this beautiful story that I share in the book. Actually, before I share the story, can I just share one little piece for anyone that's listening that was struggling with autonomy? It's a really simple little strategy for people who do feel, I'm backtracking a bit, but I wrote it down as something that I do want to mention. If you ever start to feel like you're powerless, if you start to feel like everything is too much, everything's out of your control, you start to feel, why me? Instantly shift from why me to what next. Okay, what next? It acknowledges the situation. You're accepting things as they are, but then you're also asking yourself, what can I do in this situation? How do I focus on what I can control and take that next step? Then from there, so we've gone from why me to what next. In that state, we often focus on things that we should have done or things that we should do. Now, Kevin, how do you feel when I say, Kevin, you should do this, you should do that?
Don't should on me.
Exactly, right? We have this negative reaction to it. It's called reactance, where we resist. We don't want to be told what to do because that actually undermines our autonomy. And then when we tell ourselves we should do this, we should do that, we then have that feeling of reactance to ourselves. We either become full of shame and regret and guilt, or we just want to resist it and rebel against it. So instead of shoulds, research says move from should to could. When you ask yourself, what could I do? It's fascinatingly been found that it opens up divergent thinking. You come up with more options because should is very much driven from the emotion centers of the brain. Could requires you to re-engage the prefrontal regions to come up with options, solutions. So what I encourage you to do, everyone listening, is grab a piece of paper. I'm a big fan of physical paper and pen. Grab a piece of paper, separate it into two columns. On the left side, you write could. This is your could list. In that situation, you write down everything you could do. Okay, I could stay in bed, but I could get up. I could make breakfast. I could go to the gym. I could call a friend. You just write down things. This reminds you that there are always options. You have choices. In your second column on the right, you write down will. That is your I will list. From everything you wrote on the left column, pick 1, 2, or 3 things that you will do and then commit to doing them. This instantly re-engages your autonomy, reminds you that no matter how bad things seem, there are always things you can do. And when you take action on it, you're giving your brain a proof point that even in uncertainty, even when I feel powerless, I can still take action. I can still move forward. And that is really powerful to again re-engage those prefrontal regions, make you feel that sense of autonomy, keep moving forward. So that, and I think that ties so beautifully into the Viktor Frankl story, because there was another prisoner of war called Admiral Stockdale. He was a prisoner of war during the Vietnam War, and he survived, I think he did 8 years in a concentration camp or one of these prison camps. And he has this idea of optimism versus hope. So he says, those who didn't make it had too much optimism and were not aware of the actual reality of the situation. And he says, you must never confuse optimism with the reality of what you're currently experiencing. You need to balance the two. So you need to acknowledge, yes, okay, this is really bad. This is really hard, but I still have hope that things will turn out okay in the end. And so when we're looking at autonomy, a big part of it is hope. Yes, things might be tough. Yes, you might not have a lot of control in that situation, but have hope that things will get better. And hope is incredibly powerful. We think hope is a feeling, like a warm, fuzzy feeling. But the late Professor Charles Snyder studied it for decades. He describes it as a cognitive state. It is a choice. It's a choice that we make based on what we choose to focus on. And he described it beautifully. He said, when you have, a light source coming in and then you take glass that has like a prism, right? And you face it to the light source and then that light goes off in all these different directions and becomes like a rainbow. He said, hope is like a rainbow for the mind. It allows you to think of options and solutions and possibilities and that brightens your life. And I think that's such a beautiful idea to remind ourselves that, when we're talking about big trust and backing ourselves, some of it comes down to making those conscious choices of belief that I have hope, things are going to work out, I will find a way.
Well, that's a great way to come to, the anchor of the show here, the path to big trust is what you have in the book. And
yes,
trust has become my go-to term. Another reason you're here, Shadé, because I am not a fan of certainty. I think we are harming ourselves with this quest for certainty amongst things that we can't be certain about. Most of our life is subjective, I believe.
Yes.
And yet we try to be objective. We try to be certain. We seek for truth, quote, truth that I think often can't exist when somebody else feels differently. We look for fact. We look for black, white, right, wrong. We can go through those. And I am practicing not using any of those terms. I don't care if it's gravity. I'm not going to claim it as a certainty. It's something that I have chosen to trust in gravity. I am today. I bet I will be till the day I die. But you know what? I'm just, as a practice, going to remain open and just admit or embrace that this is what I am trusting in. And I am seeking constantly wisdom. I'm doing that today with you. I sense and am seeking and am looking for more wisdom to apply to my life so that my trust is a better bet, that I have more faith in it, that I can trust even more. But I want to embrace trust in myself, you can take this anywhere, trust in a higher power if you have that. But to me, it feels like as I look at agency, especially as one of, all four of your attributes, I focus a lot on agency as being what helps us feel more secure. And that's my focal point. I feel like trust, embracing things as trust. Don't put the agency onto a certainty or onto something. Own it, as you talk about ownership.
Beautiful.
And so trust is, maybe that's the first tattoo I should get. Trust.
Beautiful. And I love it because the way that you defined it is also faith. It's related to faith.
Yeah.
It's having full faith in who you are and also faith in your belief. I mean, I have a very strong belief about a higher purpose and a higher power. And, it's interesting because when we look at all the insights that are from literature and research and what's in big trust, if you can, this is especially for people who believe in a higher power. If you acknowledge that that is the purpose for existing and we are so much more than our physical selves, we're spiritual beings having a physical experience, suddenly doubts don't matter. Theoretically, we should be able to quieten the ego and live from that place. It's very difficult to do that because we are living in this physical realm and we are influenced by everything around us and beliefs. And that's why the way I see it is big trust allows you to take that first step to trust in yourself, to then take the next step, which is to trust in that higher power, that higher purpose that you have. So it's almost getting you to baseline faith so that you can then take that next step, which I think is so beautiful.
Okay, you already mentioned a part 2. Maybe that's it.
Yeah, maybe we go into that. Now, Kevin, before we wrap up, because I know, again, we are coming to time, with adaptability, I wanted to just share a few simple tips and techniques for people to help. So our interpretation of adaptability is very much to do with, can I adapt to the emotions that come with self-doubt? Because if you strip emotion out of any experience of self-doubt, what are you left with? You're usually just left with some thoughts that are reflecting a belief. But if you don't have the feeling associated with the thought, you can rationally process the thought. You can ask yourself, is this true? Do I want to believe everything I think? Well, if you don't have the feeling attached to it, then you can say, no, actually, this is based on evidence. This is not true. I'm going to take action anyway. I'm going to approach that person. I'm going to keep moving forward. Emotion is what fuels self-doubt in its negative form. And so once we can learn to navigate and respond to and adapt to and harness the emotions that we're feeling, life becomes so much easier. It really does. So I want to share a few things just to wrap up. You mentioned that the brain seeks certainty. We seek certainty. The brain is seeking certainty because if you think about it from the perspective of wanting to use the least amount of metabolic power, if it knows something for certain, it doesn't have to deal with uncertainty, and that's much easier for it. So it will often overthink in an attempt to create a sense of certainty. And what it's doing is overthinking about all the things that could go wrong or all the things you did wrong in the past to protect you so you don't take action, so you're not experiencing the uncertainty of all the things that could happen, because then your brain has succeeded. You're safe, but you're also completely stuck. And when you acknowledge that about your brain, in fact, there's a really interesting correlation between intelligence and overthinking. People who tend to be more intelligent also tend to have greater awareness of complexity and risk. And so their minds are going to magnify all the things that could go wrong, which then leads them to have greater anxiety, lower confidence, and then get stuck in that cycle of overthinking. But if you can acknowledge, hey, this is my brain doing what it does, it's working, great, I don't have to listen to it, I am safe to act anyway. We call it the spiral interrupt technique. Simply by saying that to yourself gets you out of that autopilot default mode thinking, because whenever you take conscious awareness of and control of your thoughts, you're re-engaging the prefrontal regions. And even if you don't believe what you're saying, by re-engaging the prefrontal regions, it results in sort of deactivation of the threat centers, the emotive centers. So you're going to make better decisions. So, acknowledging that is really helpful. I'm going to share 3 simple tips for anyone listening. The first one is you don't have to accept every emotion as it comes. So there was a study that was conducted, I think it was from Harvard, a number of years back, where they wanted to see whether you can relabel an emotion from something negative to something positive. And so what the researchers did is it was Alison Woodbrooks. They brought people together and split them into a series of groups, but they were putting them into situations that are anxiety inducing. So doing a maths exam with no preparation, doing an impromptu speech in front of a room full of strangers, or singing in public. Now, Kevin, out of those 3, which one would cause you the most anxiety?
Oh, goodness. Singing in public would not be
All
my
right,
favorite.
next time we're going to put you in public and do a little bit of a social experiment, get you to sing. I'm kidding. But okay, so these are typically anxiety inducing. So what they did with one group, they asked them to say out loud, I'm excited. Not I'm anxious, but I'm feeling excited. And what they found is the group that said that out loud before they did these things had less anxiety and performed better. You can change a state. Now notice that the researcher didn't ask them to say, hey, I'm really calm. That wouldn't have worked. The brain is not stupid. It knows when there's emotional incongruence. So anxiety is a high energy negative state. There's a lot of physiological arousal. And so what you do is you're shifting that physiological arousal from something negative, oh my gosh, I'm so anxious, they're going to judge me, into I'm really excited, which shifted their state from something restrictive to something more expansive. And it's remarkable because if you do think about it, the physiological response, so what you feel in and on your body when you're about to get onto stage with 10,000 people watching, is very, very similar, if not identical, to what you would feel if you're sitting in the front row of the VIP seating area about to see your favorite band come onto stage. The heart rate increases, the body temperature increases, you feel this energy around your body, this jittery, internal state. It's very similar. Your brain interprets the situation based on whether it perceives a threat. And then if it does, it distinguishes between anxiety or excitement. So you can change your state just by relabeling it. So that's the first tip for anyone who wants to get better at navigating the emotions that come with doubt. The second one is if you tend to overthink and worry a lot, this is something that I use frequently. I'll share it really quickly. The most distracting thoughts are the ones that are related to the worries that we have. You don't have to distract yourself every time it comes up. Capture it. Every time a distracting thought comes up, write it down in your worry list. Again, I have a physical notebook for this. Write worry list at the top and you write down the distraction. Sometimes the brain just wants to make sure you're not going to forget something. And if you write it down, there's this level of, okay, cool, it's written down, I can deal with it later. The next step is you say, okay, I'm not going to worry about you now. I'm going to worry about you during allocated worry time. Which brings us to step 2. Have 5 or 10 minutes or up to 30 minutes every day that you schedule in your calendar that is your worry time. When that time comes, maybe it's 5 p.m., maybe it's 7 p.m. after dinner with a cup of tea, whatever it is, set an alarm, pull out your worry list, and let your mind run wild. Worry, catastrophize, feel all the feels, whatever it is. Honor that worry. Once the alarm goes off, no more worrying. You say to yourself, okay, I'm done with worry time. Then you look at your list and you say, what from here can I control? Can I do anything about this? If you can, great. Go to your I could and your I will list again. Write down all the things you could do. Select 1 to 3 things that you will do, and then take action. It gives what behavioral psychologists and what behavioral scientists call an immediate return on your worries. So it's like, great, I'm doing something with this. And then you keep that habitual pattern every day. Write down the worry, deal with it at worry time. It's called a stimulus control for worry. And research has found it is remarkably effective at managing that overthinking associated with worry. It also builds trust in yourself because you start to acknowledge how many things never became true, never turned into reality. And so you start to trust yourself more to deal with the uncertainty. So that's the second tip. I use it all the time, especially before bed. I always write down my worries, and it means I'm not waking up at 2 a.m. worrying about them.
Fair.
Now, the second, or rather the third tip that I'll share here. We were talking a lot about, especially when we started, one of the superpowers you can develop when it comes to big trust is acknowledging that you don't have to eliminate the self-doubt. That's not the goal. Self-doubt is your body and your brain's way of doing what it needs to do. And eliminating it entirely distracts you with things that are very difficult to do. What you need to do instead is acknowledge that you can have the thought and not believe the thought. You don't have to internalize the thought. You don't have to believe everything you think, and you don't have to trust everything you feel. So something that can help with this, because then people ask, how on earth do I separate from my thoughts? How do I not internalize this? And the first step is awareness and creating what's called cognitive diffusion between us and the thought or the emotion. So the simplest example comes from the world of emotions. A lot of people will say, I'm anxious, I'm stressed. But what we know is anything that you add after the words I am, you are internalizing. And when you say I am anxious, I am stressed, you're making this a fixed permanent state, which it's not. So what you do in those moments, instead of defaulting to I'm stressed, I'm anxious, you would create cognitive diffusion, which means you notice the thought. So you actually say to yourself or to someone else, I'm noticing feelings of anxiety. I'm noticing that I'm holding a lot of stress. You see how that instantly, as opposed to I'm anxious, I'm overwhelmed, I'm noticing feelings of overwhelm. I'm noticing that I'm carrying anger. It creates separation. Then it allows you to go, okay, what triggered this? What is the stimulus for this state? Can I address that? So that's our first step. And it also applies with thoughts. So classic thought, oh, I'm a failure. I'm worthless. As opposed to that, you'd say, I notice a thought that's telling me I'm a failure. I'm noticing that there's a part of me saying I'm worthless. You're creating separation. It is so simple, but it's very, very powerful because it also reduces activity in the emotion centers because you're controlling your thoughts. You're actively guiding your attention. So that's really, really powerful, the idea of separating from the emotion. And then that helps you become more aware of these thoughts that are trying to hold you back and the emotions that are not conducive to you getting to where you want to go, that achievement that you're seeking.
The whole book, just as you've gone through, you have so many actionable steps, which I'm
all about
really,
the action.
I really appreciate that. And I look at it as training ground for, as the book over my shoulder says, to grow our trust. Again, I love the word. I love the concept of that. I want to turn away from so many of these rigid terminologies and concepts, even the term belief I struggle with, as opposed to trust. And as you talk about, that goes into the aspect of faith. If I can increase my trust, increase my faith, well, my self-doubt recedes.
Yeah.
I'm grateful.
I'm
What a gift.
grateful too. Sorry, Kevin, I know that we're like coming to the end, but just the idea of belief and trust, can I share with you a little example, which I think is so cool? So Kevin, if I were to say to you, yeah, I believe you. I believe you. What that's referring to is I believe you based on what you've told to me and the information that I have. But if something changes, then maybe I won't believe you anymore. And that's the thing with belief. Belief can be broken. But if I were to say, Kevin, I trust you.
Yes.
That is, I fundamentally trust who you are and what you're about and your integrity and your values. You see how powerful trust is over belief? Belief can be shaky. Trust is this deep internal state.
It feels more connected when you say, I trust you. You trust me, even if I share a belief that turns out not to be true.
Exactly. Yes. Isn't that cool?
That.
I love that.
Great. Great mic drop right there.
Yes.
Really? Okay. I'm gonna have to, and again, I like your focus on words, on the words that we use are what train our neural pathway, train our beliefs. And we're all today at risk of, well, not at risk. We have opportunity,
Yes.
to grow ourselves, our self-confidence in this aspect, our self-trust, as opposed to fall to the self-doubt. I feel like you're shining a light on some concepts that we as a culture are suffering from maybe more than ever. And we need different, no, I was just say different voices. We need different perspectives. And you brought that. I love the research in the book. And yeah, again, the actionable steps. And just thank you for being here. Thank you for letting me have your time before you take off to another side of the world.
Thanks, Kevin. Honestly, thank you for the opportunity to be here. I want to also thank everyone who has tuned in and has given themselves this opportunity to fundamentally change their understanding of self-doubt. And I encourage you. So a lot of the time when we get to the end of sessions like this, people feel so empowered, but also completely deflated because they think there's so many things I need to do. Don't allow that. See, that's the sign that you don't trust yourself. You just need to ask, what could I do from what I've learned? And then what will I do? And focus on the 1, 2, or 3 things that are going to have the greatest impact for you. Now, one thing I also will share for anyone listening, the beginning of the book has a 12-question self-diagnostic where you can determine what your doubt profile is, because everyone falls at a different level on each of these 4 attributes. And depending on what yours is, it determines what your pathway is, where you should focus. We're going to make that completely free for people. So you don't even need to buy the book. You can just do that little quiz at bigtrustbook.com. So bigtrustbook.com, and you'll be able to do those 12 questions, get your little doubt profile, and at least determine what you need to focus on or what your existing superpowers are. Because a lot of high potential people who achieve amazing things, and this kind of brings it full circle, Kevin, you said you've been able to achieve some amazing things, but it has led you to burnout because you've been chasing that sense of enoughness and worthiness. And so this is a very, very common profile. We find people very low on acceptance. So they're constantly chasing that feeling of enough. They're pretty high on agency. So they believe that they have skills and competencies. They can figure it out. They're very high on autonomy. So they're always focusing on what they can control, which allows them to move forward. But they're mid-levels on adaptability, which means even though they say, no, I'm fine with my emotions, but there's this underlying anxiety and cortisol, which is fueling that lack of acceptance, which is making them feel guilty when they stop working or making them set the next goal because they're searching that feeling because it doesn't feel quite right. There's that underlying nervous energy, and that's super common. But again, knowing what your doubt profile is, you can then also lean on your stronger attributes to start to develop the weaker ones. So again, encourage you all, Big Trust book. You can go and do that quiz, figure out what your doubt profile is. And if you enjoyed this, please come along, reach out, tell Kevin what you enjoyed, leave a comment, make sure you subscribe or like and leave a review because reviews are so important for podcasts. I'm just so grateful to have had this opportunity. As Kevin mentioned, this is my last day in the US until next year. I fly to the Philippines for an event, and I live on a little island on the east coast of Thailand. So I'm headed back there after a 2.5-month tour. So it's just been the best. But if anyone wants to follow up with my work, you can follow me on Instagram, LinkedIn. We share a lot of professional content on LinkedIn, YouTube, TikTok. Just search Shadé Zahrai, which is ShadeZahrai. And of course, if you found value in this conversation, I think you're going to love the book. I wrote this for anyone who has ever doubted themselves and wants to trust themselves more. So Kevin, thank you so much.
Shadé, thank you immensely. I'm proud to be the recipient of the teaching right here and right now, and to put it out to my audience and friends and family. So again, thank you. I'm honored to anchor your trip here in America.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Thanks, everybody.
Well, thanks so much for joining us in this discussion. That again is Shadé Zahrai, Zahrai. The book, Big Trust, Rewire Self-Doubt, Find Your Confidence, and Fuel Success. And if you go to bigtrustbook.com, she's got this 12-question self-diagnostics on your level of trust and self-doubt. I think you'll find a lot of value. Till next time, here's to the evolving you and me.